Good morning, delegates. Welcome to the first session of the third committee of UN, Sochum. My name is Pierpaolo Laudonia, and I'll be your chair for the committee. We will commence today's session with roll call. Delegates, when your country's name is called, please say present and voting if you are voting, or simply say present if you're not. So, we'll go alphabetically. Australia,
Present and voting.
Austria,
Present and voting.
Colombia,
Present and voting.
Greece,
Present.
Norway,
Present and voting.
Portugal,
Present and voting.
Russian Federation,
Present and voting.
United Arab Emirates,
Present and voting.
United Kingdom,
Present and voting.
United States of America.
Present and voting.
Thank you, delegates. Are there any point or motion on the floor at this time? Delegate of Austria, you have been recognized. What point or motion do you raise?
Motion to set the agenda, sir.
Granted, delegate. To what would you like to set the agenda?
To discuss the already established topic, censorship and treatment of journalists.
Thank you, delegate. Are there any seconds to the motion proposed by the delegate of Austria? Delegate of Norway, you have been recognized. What point do you raise?
To second this motion, sir.
Thank you, delegate. Your seconding has been noted. Are there any objections to this motion? Seeing none, the motion is now in order. Thank you, delegates. The motion has been proposed and seconded, and we will now be adopting the topic censorship and the treatment of journalists. Delegates, we will now be moving in the speakers list. All delegates that would likely include their country in the speakers list, please raise their placard now. Delegates of Australia, you have been recognized. Delegates of Austria, you have been recognized. Delegates of Colombia, you have been recognized. Delegates of United Arab Emirates, you have been recognized. Delegates of Russian Federation, you have been recognized. Delegates of the United States of America, you have been recognized. Delegates, due to high time constraint, we will now pass speakers list. But if any of delegates would like to include their name in the speakers list, please send a written sheet to the head table. Thank you, delegates. Delegates of Australia, you now have the floor for a duration of 2 minutes.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, the delegate of Australia is proud to have the opportunity to take part in this prestigious conference to debate and hopefully solve major problems the world suffers from present day. Kojiro Matsura, 19 Director General of UNESCO, said, "The safety of journalists is an issue that affects us all. Every aggression against a journalist is an attack on our most fundamental freedoms. Press freedom and freedom of expression cannot be enjoyed without a basic security." This delegate
of journalists is an issue that affects us all. Every aggression against a journalist is an attack on our most fundamental freedoms. Press freedom and freedom of expression cannot be enjoyed without a basic security. This delegate.
Thank you. The delegate of Australia yields the floor to the chair.
Delegate of Austria, you have now the floor for a duration of 2 minutes.
Honorable Chair, esteemed fellow delegates, the delegate of Austria is glad to be part on this committee. We want to draw your attention on the fact to the majority of sexuality recorded by the UNESCO in the years 2008-2009 were not war correspondents, but journalists covering the local stories. We are high painfully aware to that protection offered to the media by the international humanitarian law are not respected. What action can be taken in order to ensure more safety for the journalists and media of the armed conflict?
Journalists covering the local stories. We are high and fully aware to the protection offered to the media by the international humanitarian law are not respected. What action can be taken in order to ensure more safety for the journalists and media of the armed conflict?
This delegate hopes for a constructive debate on matter. Thank you. The delegate of Austria gives the floor to the chair.
Delegate of Colombia, you now have the floor for a duration of 2 minutes.
Honorable Chair, delegates of the House, today we are gathered here to discuss the extremely relevant issue of censorship and treatment of journalists. Violence against journalists take various forms, including murder and physical assault. Psychological pressure including threats to their lives or their relatives, unfounded detention during demonstration or other public events, arrest and conviction on trumped-up criminal charges, attacks on media probity, including vandalism and arson, arbitrary police rights on editorial office and journalists. House.
or their relatives, confounding detention during demonstration or other public events, arrest and conviction on trumped-up criminal charges, attacks on media probity, including vandalism and arson, arbitrary police rights on.
Thank you. The delegate of Colombia yields the floor to the chair.
Delegate of United Arab Emirates, you now have the floor for a duration of 2 minutes.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, this delegate is proud to be part of this committee. The rights of journalists to carry out their work under safe conditions, without fear of being harassed, attacked, beaten, and killed is a topic of paramount importance for freedom of the press and freedom of expression. More than 600 journalists have been killed worldwide since 2005, most of them intentionally or in the line of duty. This delegate thinks that swift and efficient investigation must be conducted every time a journalist is the victim of an attack.
Is a topic of paramount importance for freedom of the press and freedom of expression. More than 600 journalists have been killed worldwide since 2005, most of them intentionally or in the line of duty. This delegate thinks that swift and efficient investigation must be conducted every time a journalist is the victim of an attack.
Thank you. The delegate of the United Arab Emirates yields the floor to the chair.
Delegate of the Russian Federation, you now have the floor for a duration of 2 minutes.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, it's an honor for this delegate to stay here today and to be part of this committee. It is possible for the international community to reach a common ground and pass international journalism and censorship regulation. If so, how? We believe
Delegates, it's an honor for this delegate to stay here today and to be part of this committee. It is possible for the international community to reach a common ground and pass international journalism and censorship regulation. If so, how? We believe delegates, it's an honor for this delegate to stay here today and to be part of.
the Russian Federation thinks that one possible solution of the problem is to punish the acts of violence against journalists. Only punishing this act we can solve the problem. Esteemed delegates of the House, we need to come to a consensus in order to solve the issue right now. Thank you. The delegate of the Russian Federation yields the floor to the chair.
Thank you, Delegate of the Russian Federation. Are you open to any points of information?
Any and all.
Thank you, Delegate. This delegate is open to any and all points of information. Are there any points of information for this delegate? Delegate of the United States of America, you have been recognized. What point do you raise?
Point of information, sir.
Granted, Delegate.
Honorable delegates of Russian Federation, do you really believe that punishing the acts of violence against journalists will solve the problem?
Honorable Ed Table, could you, the delegate of the United States, please rephrase the question?
Yes, Delegate of the United States, would you please be kind enough to rephrase the question for the benefit of the House?
Honorable delegates of Russian Federation, do you think that we'll be able to solve the problem punishing these acts of violence against journalists?
This delegate and the people of my country think so. Only punishing them, we believe we can achieve the end of these acts that attempt to silence journalists and other media actors. Harassment and intimidation have recently reached unprecedented heights. So,
And the people of my country think so. Only punishing them, we believe we can achieve the end of these acts that attempt to silence journalists and other media actors. Harassment and intimidation have recently reached unprecedented heights. So, and the people of my country think so. Only punishing them, we believe we can achieve the end of these acts that attempt to silence journalists and other media actors. Harassment and intimidation have recently reached.
Thank you, Delegate of Russian Federation. Delegate of US, what point do you raise?
Request to follow up, sir.
Granted, Delegate.
Honorable delegates of Russian Federation, I agree with you. We should punish this act of violence against journalists. So why, in 2014, multiple media outlets were blocked, shuttered, or saw their editorial line change overnight in response to government pressure? While launching its own media operation, the government approved legislation limiting foreign investment in Russian media. This measure took aim to publication like Vedomosti, a daily newspaper respect for its standard and independence, and owned by the three foreign media groups, Dow Jones, Financial Times Groups, and Finland's Sanoma. How do you consider all this?
Honorable Delegate of the United States, this delegate is surprised. I like to remind the delegate of the United States that Obama administration authorization of secret wiretaps of journalists and aggressive leaks persecution has had a well-documented chilling effect on the national security reporting. This delegate finds hard to believe that the delegate of the United States of America, who is the advocate of the world peace, is actually not making a statement about the massive human rights violation. Thank you, Delegate of the House.
Thank you, Delegate of Russian Federation. What point do you raise?
The right to reply, sir.
On what grounds, Delegate?
On the ground that the USA's sovereignty has been infringed upon.
Granted, Delegate.
Delegate of Russian Federation, is not correct to affirm that the United States have been violating human rights, but what about the numerous attempts of Russian president to remake a media landscape in the government's image?
Thank you, Delegate of the United States. Delegate of the Russian Federation, due to time constraint, we will not entertain a response from you. Please be kind enough to give in your response in the form of a chat. Thank you, Delegate. Delegate of Greece, what point do you raise?
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point, Delegate of Greece.
The delegate would like to ask the House to open to moderated caucus topic.
The head table is open to moderate caucus topics. Delegates, please be kind enough to send moderate caucus topics as you wish. Thank you, Delegate of Greece. Delegate of Columbia, what point do you raise?
Point of personal privilege.
State your point, Delegate of Columbia.
Can this delegate use the washroom?
Granted. Delegates, are there any motion on the floor? Delegate of the United Kingdom, what point or motion do you raise?
A moderate caucus topic, Your Honor.
State the moderate caucus topic, Delegate.
Safety of women journalists.
Thank you, Delegate. And how much time would you like to allocate?
10 minutes with the 2 minutes per speaker.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegates, a moderate caucus topic has been proposed by the Delegate of UK. Are there any seconds to this motion? Seeing seconds, are there any objections to this motion? Delegate of Columbia, what point do you raise?
To object the motion, Your Honor.
On what grounds, Delegate?
On the grounds that the topic is not relevant now.
Thank you, Delegate of Columbia. Delegates, seeing that there were seconds and an objection to this moderate caucus topic submitted by the Delegate of Columbia, we will now directly move into voting. All delegates in favor of adopting this moderate caucus topic, please raise your placard now. Thank you, delegates. All delegates against, please raise your placards now. Due to our overwhelming majority, we now have adopted this moderate caucus topic. Delegate of Greece, by default, you have now the floor.
Thank you. Delegates of the House, female journalists working in the context of reporting conflict and organized crime are particularly vulnerable to physical attacks, including sexual assaults and harassment. Women journalists need to be able to rely on secure non-physical means of communication with their sources. Women sources may face the same physical risks outlined before, especially if their journalistic contact is male. Additionally, female confidential sources who are domestic abuse victims may be physically unable to their homes and therefore be reliant on digital communications. Women journalists need to be able to rely on secure digital communications, especially when working on dangerous stories, such as those about corruption and crime. Encrypted communications and other defensive measures are therefore of great importance to ensure that their movements are not tracked and the identity of the source remains confidential. Thank you, delegates.
Thank you, Delegate of Greece. Delegate of Norway, what point do you raise?
A point of information to the Delegate of Greece.
Denied. Delegate of Norway, this House does not entertain points of information for moderate caucus topic speech. Thank you, Delegate of Norway. Delegates, are there any motions to the floor? Delegate of UK, what point do you raise?
Motion to move into 50 minutes and moderate cakes during which the draft resolution will be writing.
Thank you, Delegate of United Kingdom. Are there any seconds to this motion? Delegate of Australia, you have been recognized. What point do you raise?
To second this motion.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any objections to this motion? Delegates, seeing that there are no objections, we will now move into one moderate caucus. Welcome back, delegates. We have received two resolutions, one sponsored by the delegate of the United States and one sponsored by the delegate of the Russian Federation. We will be discussing the resolution submitted by the delegate of the United Nations first, seeing that it was the first resolution to be given to the head table, following a moderate caucus. Delegate of the USA, by default, you have now the floor for a time span of 2 minutes, debate on the resolution.
With the permission from the head table and the delegates of this esteemed House, I'd like to draw your attention to first and foremost operative clause.
From the head table and the delegates of this esteemed House, I'd like to draw your attention to first and foremost operative clause. From the head table and the delegates of this esteemed House, I'd like to draw your attention to first and foremost operative clause. From the head table and the delegates of this esteemed House, I'd like to draw your attention to first and foremost operative clause.
Thank you, delegates.
Delegates of Austria, what point or motion do you raise?
Motion to move to open debate on this resolution, sir.
Thank you, Delegate of Austria. Are there any seconds to this motion? Seeing seconds, are there any objections to this motion? Seeing none, this motion is now in order. Delegates, we are now in open debate. Are any delegates who wish to obtain the floor? Delegate of Russian Federation, you have been recognized. What point do you raise?
To obtain the floor.
Granted.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, I'd like to draw your attention to
Harassment and intimidation have recently reached unprecedented heights. So it and the people of Mekong think so. Only punishing them we believe we can achieve the end of these acts that attempted to silence journalists and other media actors. Harassment and intimidation have recently reached it and the people of Mekong think so. Only punishing them we believe we can achieve the end of these acts that attempted to silence journalists and other media actors. Harassment and intimidation have recently reached unprecedented heights. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate of the Russian Federation. Delegates, we have now entered speeches for and against this resolution. Due to time constraint, we will now be moving in voting on this resolution. Administrative staff, please take your positions. Delegates, you have three options. You can either vote for a resolution, you can vote against the resolution, you can abstain from voting on a resolution. All the delegates in favor of resolution GA100101, please raise up the placards now. All the delegates against? Delegates abstaining from voting on this resolution? Thank you, delegates. Due to a overwhelming majority, this resolution now passes. This session is now in recess.